good afternoon from Morristown, New Jersey. This is Bruce Pearson, and I'm with you today at the Jersey Access Group. And we are located at the Hyatt Center in Morristown with the Jersey Access Group Conference. I'm meeting right now with Jody Miller, and Jody is the president of NATOA, right?
That's right.
So, welcome aboard, and thank you for taking time to be with us. And tell me a little bit about what the acronym stands for the viewers and listeners that aren't familiar with it, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, you started me with a difficult one. It's a mouthful, but we're the National Association of Telecommunications Officers and Advisors, NATOA. And that is a national trade association with members all across the country that have common interests when it comes to local communications.
Okay, so that runs the gamut from not only access community television channels, but what else?
Well, our members are, the one thing that seems to be in common for all of us is local government, but we have the range of public, education, and government access TV stations.
Okay.
Also, attorneys and consultants who advise local governments and local governments who are dealing on the consumer protection side of things. It has to do with cable franchising. In my community, I also wear the hat of trying to help you resolve your complaint if you're a cable customer and you have a problem, and you can call our office to try to get that resolved. Then we also have members now who are involved in public safety or communications and social media for their city, websites and web streaming and all kinds of the newer technologies. But I'd say the one thing that we all have in common is we are tied in some way to a local government and dealing with communications, which can be a lot of things these days.
And an ever-expanding number of things, too. And certainly
Absolutely.
The complexity doesn't diminish as time goes on, nor the range of options. I mean, clearly 10 years ago, you weren't watching television content or listening to radio content on your phone. So
Exactly.
that is just one little snapshot of how things have changed and expanded. The questions about funding, the questions about is there a tariff related to an uncontrolled channel, and how does that affect what cable companies have been required to throw into the pot, if you will, to help fund what you do? And yet, how does that get impacted by public policy? And is there any discussion of public policy as to whether there's a need to rearrange the funding schedule?
Exactly.
Clearly, free internet access does not allow for a gatekeeper function or a collection of those funds to be diverted to you to help fund the service that you provide. So, let me not speak for you, but I mean, it seems to me there's a myriad of issues that are not only relevant today, but are dynamic and changing and being added to every day. So.
Exactly right. The world used to be a little more simple, or we had all of our telecommunications silos, and telephone was telephone, and computers were computers, and cable TV or television was separate, and each had its own structure. And in each of those arenas, there are some public interest activities, like you mentioned. In the telephone world, there's a Universal Service Fund that originally helped get landline phones to every home in the country, even in rural areas or low-income areas. Cable TV, some of those public service dollars have helped fund at the local level the community cable stations that we have, and everything is migrating onto the internet, but the internet has been traditionally unregulated and untaxed, and it's the free internet. So how will we maintain those public services that we're all providing, and how will we continue to transition toward a future funding structure for that?
One could argue that even though it's the free internet, how do we tax it? It's also the free internet in terms of operational costs that you're not paying necessarily an exorbitant amount to get on that highway. Is if you as an analogy, if you were paying for a channel on Comcast, you would pay an extremely high amount to have coverage in your licensing area, your town or municipality, to buy a channel on that franchise. So one could argue that's kind of an offsetting factor. Yeah, you're not gaining revenue, and it certainly doesn't address the issue of operating a studio and all the infrastructure necessary. However, as far as distribution costs, when you take away the element of a limited number of channels, a limited number of limited amount of bandwidth, therefore a finite universe in which to convey this business of communication, as the old days when you had 13 VHF channels and 71 UHF channels and X number of AM frequencies available and X number of FM. Well, that was a quantifiable amount to say, here's what we're going to sell these licenses for, here's the constraints we're going to put on because it's a public trust, and so on. When you take that into an open arena, it throws all those structures and all those scenarios out the door. So one would ask, does NATOA support local PEG channels or local community access channels self-funding to the extent of selling sponsorships or following the PBS model for underwriting grants to support a show or a function or whatever? Where's that at? Is that getting any traction?
That's definitely one of several approaches that our members are trying to take, is to become more diversified and more self-sufficient in their revenue sources. And like you mentioned earlier, our origin was that because of the franchise that we had with the cable operator, we were able to receive the in-kind support of the channels and also some cash support to run our operation, and that was really an exchange for the rent for the use of the rights of way for them to do their commercial business. But now we need to think of ourselves as a content provider and a media source, and it's a whole new education to understand how to monetize or how to be commercially, or I should say financially viable as a media source. And like you said, other content providers negotiate agreements with the cable or distributors to carry their content, and we need to start educating ourselves on how to think that way and how to find ways to monetize what we are doing and find the support for that. But I still think that there are many types of public services and public benefits out there that are important for the citizens, important for low-income people, things like libraries and education and providing transparent coverage of city government and county government that are always going to probably need some public support in order to continue going forward.
Well, I think you bring up a very valid point. I mean, there's a number of, in an organized society, you can argue to what extent and what it should or should not be, but there's certain functions that government is really the only entity that can provide. Everybody pays for fire and rescue if you have paid fire and rescue, or donates to a volunteer fire and rescue in many cases, whether you have a fire or not. It's not a zero-sum operation. It's done for the good of society. We pay for police protection even if we never call the police. We pay for all the roads, whether it's at the local, state, or federal level. Whether we actually drive on all the roads or not is not the issue. There is, and so there's a function there that these are part of the infrastructure for the sewers and waters. Yeah, we pay a use fee. We pay for the water we use if you're on a municipal water system. You pay for the sewer fee. You pay for garbage collection. But you didn't pay directly last week for what it cost to run that water line to your house unless you made special. So I think it's not irresponsible to say, look, this is a public service. This is a communicative service between government and the people, and from people to people, and organizations and nonprofits and NGOs and the schools and so on and so forth. It's not unreasonable to think that if there is value there, and that would be for the citizens to decide,
it's not unreasonable to pay something for that, like all these other services that are part of the fabric of society. What do you sense in a non-regulated environment? What kind of feedback are you getting from municipal governments, or what's the pulse of what's going on? Which direction is government going in? Is the BPU just trying to avoid it until the cable companies push back and say, we're not going to pay the full rate anymore because you're distributing on free internet? Have you heard that yet?
I haven't heard that. I've only heard one of our members just in a conversation this week mentioning an example of that. I'm not sure if that'll change over time, if that campaign or mantra will start to appear more and more. But local governments, I think, around the country, many have, into some states, have already experienced statewide franchising of cable instead of local franchising, and they've already experienced some financial losses to the local stations there. And in those communities where it's been really embraced as a necessity that's not going away, they've in some cases found ways to fund it out of the general fund of the city, in combination with possibly creating a nonprofit that's going out and getting other types of funding. But in other places it has been stressed, it has been challenged. There have been stations that have closed due to the changes in the funding sources, and so I think it really depends too on how the stations position themselves to be an integral part of the community and really providing whatever types of communication services that community really is finding a priority and a value, and then figuring out a way to fund that. But the idea that right now the cable companies are paying franchise fees and PEG fees to support community access. Telephone and voice companies have other types of taxes and fees, and as these silos come down and everything is converging, will we eventually create a different kind of source? So perhaps even satellite dish companies and all the different distributors who carry television or video would share that, and maybe it would actually reduce the burden on the cable industry. We were asked that recently by someone from the Cable Association, and it's like that'd be an ideal to shoot for, but that's a long transition to go through. And of course, as the mayor said at the luncheon today, for local governments, the most dangerous time is any time legislature is in session or we're on the radar screen at the federal level in Congress. So there's a lot of fear about going down the path of making change and then ending up with a complete reduction or loss of what we have now. So it's going to be, if the Telecom Act at the federal level really is reopened for updating, which has been talked about for years, that's when we're all going to have to be at the table and really working hard to see if we can maintain that and in a new restructured approach.
There's a myriad of things we could talk about all afternoon, obviously. Your background, how long have you been involved with NATOA?
I've been with NATOA for quite a few years. I've been at my job in the Minneapolis-St. Paul suburbs for about 26 years and started getting involved at the state chapter there. I got on the NATOA board probably 6-7 years ago, and I just started my presidency last fall. So it's been more of an opportunity to travel around the country and go to the different state chapter events and go to several events in Washington, D.C., and it's really great then to be able to meet members from all over the country and see more of the national picture.
How much of a disparity, if I may, is there between New Jersey and, I know that in terms of what community access is doing, how active they are, the flavor of their programming, their approach to it?
My impressions, and of course I'm not an expert on New Jersey, but my impressions from knowing some of the members on the chapter board and now being here this week for the conference, I think it's more grassroots, and it's very impressive the amount of quantity and quality of programming that they're producing, with many organizations being really supported by volunteers or people who have their day job and then just do this community media work as an extra thing in their life. And I do see other states that are like that. Some states have a little bit more luxury of more funded, professional staffed stations. It probably goes back to how they were organized years ago and how the franchise fee support was funneled or dedicated for that use. But my impression here has been that there's a lot of amazing amounts of programming being produced with maybe one paid professional and a group of volunteers as the crew for the program. And that takes a lot of passion. You're going to end up having programs that are produced by people who are really excited about that topic that they're producing. So
it would tend to be like herding cats in many ways, I would assume.
Exactly.
Well, I appreciate you coming by.
Thanks for having me.
I know you do a lot of work, and it's very comprehensive, and it gets more complex every day, as well as the political issues and the financial issues and everything you have to deal with. But certainly appreciate you being here, and thank you for being on Jersey Talk Radio. And are you speaking further at the
conference? Yes, there are 2 workshops tomorrow. One is on the production of election and political programming in election season. And the other is kind of what we've just been talking about with the transition to over-the-top video, what happens to our traditional financial structures. So
it's a big pro. It's not going away. So thank you, Jody Miller, and you are the president of NOTA, and you're from the great state of Minnesota.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it very much.
Thanks.
Thank you for coming by, and have a great rest of the conference together with all the attendees and the vendors. Thanks a million.
We will.
Thanks.
Bye-bye now.